Good morning, students. Now we are going to discuss on data movement verb in COBOL programming language from Unit 2. So this data movement verb, which seems to be an important verb in the movements of the data from one operand to another operand, or one identifier to another identifier, or one literal to another literal. So here this data movement verb which plays an important role in moving the value of one operand to the other operand. So after the movement of this particular data, the value will be in the form the data 1 will be moved to the data 2, or the operand 1 value will be moved to the operand 2. So while performing these operations, we used to follow some various procedures. So the various procedures are discussed in the following slides. So this is going to be the introduction for data movement verb. And then here, aim of this lesson is to introduce the learner as how to move data from one place to another place in memory. So here we are going to move the value so in terms of memory. So for example, operand 1 it used to have some memory places, and operand 2 which used to have some memory places. Now we are going to move the value present in operand 1 memory to the operand 2 memory. So how we are going to move? So using the verb named as move verb, we used to call it as a data movement verb. Using this particular verb, we are going to move the data from one operand to another operand. So here generally, technically speaking, we are going to use the term as the identifier. So we are going to move the value from one identifier to another identifier using move verb. So the syntax, the rules are listed over here. The syntax of the move verb is identifier 1 move to identifier 2 or identifier 3 or literal 1. So here we used to have the sending field and receiving field. So which one is going to act like an sending field and which one is going to act like an receiving field? So that will be decided based on how we are using the data movement verb. So the move verb is the one we are using as an data movement verb over here. And then we have some various rules that to be followed while using data movement verb. The first rule, which is going to be like this: the contents of identifier 1 or the value of literal 1 is moved to identifier 2 or identifier 3 or any number of identifiers. That's why I have mentioned over here as etc. And then so there may be more than one receiving field, whereas there must be at least only one sending field. So this is an important thing here. So always we have to use only one sending field, whereas you could have more than one receiving fields. So to the left of data movement verb, we used to use one identifier name, and to the right of data movement verb, we used to use more than one identifier names. So we used to have only one sending field, whereas we used to have more than one receiving field. And then the contents of all the receiving fields will be replaced by the value of the sending field. So this is very important. For example, identifier 1 move to identifier 2 comma identifier 3 comma identifier 4, for example. So from identifier 1 we are going to pass the value to identifier 2 and identifier 3 and identifier 4. So before receiving the value, the identifier 2 and identifier 3 and identifier 4 may have some other value. But after receiving the value, the identifier 2 and identifier 3 and identifier 4, which used to have the value of identifier 1. So this is going to be a very important one. And the contents of identifier 1 remain unaltered, which means the sending field which used to hold the same value, whereas the receiving field which used to possess some different values after using the data movement verb. And then this is going to be the first rule that we have. And the next rule, which is about, we used to use various types of data. So what is the type of data that you're going to use? Based on that, we used to decide so what type of data transfer it is. For example, when the sending field is numeric and the receiving field is numeric or numeric edited, for example, using some picture options, we used to edit symbols. So these types of data movements, we used to call it as an numeric data transfer. So here, for example, identifier 1 moves to identifier 2, where identifier 1, which is an numeric identifier, and identifier 2, which is going to be an another numeric identifier. So we are going to send a numeric value from one identifier to the another identifier. So these types of numeric value movements from one identifier to another identifier, we used to call it as an numeric data transfer. And then the next one, when both the sending field and receiving fields are alphabetic or alphanumeric edited, the data movement is called alphanumeric data transfer. So here, for example, we have identifier 1 to the left of your data movement verb, and then to the right of data movement verb we have identifier 2 and then identifier 3. When identifier 1 and identifier 2 and identifier 3, and all these identifiers are alphabetic or alphanumeric, we used to call these types of transferring the alphabetic value or alphanumeric value from one identifier to many more identifiers. We used to call this as an alphanumeric data transfer. So here we have some restrictions in passing the values from one identifier to another identifier. So the restrictions are, suppose in case the receiving area is you have some minimum spaces, whereas in sending field you have some more number of spaces. At those times, what will happen? For example, the sending field, which is going to have only 5 characters, whereas in receiving field you're going to have some 7 character positions. At those times, what will happen? And then in another example, suppose if the sending field, which consists of some 5 characters, and then receiving field, which is going to have only 3 character position, at those time what will happen? So these are some problems that we have over alphanumeric data transfer. So in such cases, the receiving area is filled from left to right. This is going to be the first condition that we have. So whenever that we used to move the data from one identifier to another identifier in alphanumeric data transfer, the values will be filled from left to right. This is going to be the first condition that we have. And then suppose if the sending field size seems to be an smallest one, and suppose if the receiving field size seems to be an biggest one, so in this juncture, actually the value movement will happen. And after the value movement, whenever the receiving field, which holds some largest character positions, will be filled with 0. So you will have some zero fill option or a space fill option in the receiving field. And then the next condition is when the receiving area is smaller, and then the sending field, which is going to be an largest one. So in this situation, the truncation occurs from the right, and the compiler gives a warning to that particular effect. So suppose the sending field seems to be an um, uh, largest one, and receiving field seems to be an smallest one. So in these types of data movement, where the receiving field, which used to truncate as some of the values from whatever that it received from the sending field, so these types of truncation may occur. So this is going to be the problems that may happen while the size of the sending field and receiving field is not matching. And we have some examples over here. The first example, move a to b. So we are going to move the value of a to uh, identifier b. So that's the thing, it's going to happen over here. And then the picture class of capital A is 49 position, and picture class of capital B, which is going to consist of the same 49 position. It won't be problem, so the values will move from identifier A to identifier B without any trouble. And then second example, where the picture class which of the sending field, which is going to be just 999, and the picture class of receiving field, which consists of some 4 nines. So here we are going to send a 4-digit value, for example 5675, from the sending field to the receiving field. So in this place, we used to fill from left to right. So here we have some 4-digit position at the receiving field. So the first position will be filled with 0, because we are moving only some 3 digits from the sending field to the receiving field, but the receiving field size seems to be the biggest one comparing to the sending field. So while filling from left to right, initially it used to fill the 0 value, and the second character and subsequent character will be filled with some correct uh, digits. So you will have some 0 fill on the left. And then in the next example, move 15 to a. So 15, which is going to be an numeric literal, we are going to move this literal value to the identifier capital A. The next example, which is about move within double quotes, there is an error, to capital A. Now we are going to move the alphabetic value, which is an alphabetic literal here, to the identifier capital A. And this identifier capital A, which holds some 17 spaces, so it won't be problem. Easily we would be able to move this particular alphabetic value to identifier capital A. So these are some of the examples that we have related to data movement verb. So students, you have to keep it in mind that while using data movement verb, we must know how we have to use the data movement verb. And we have in various types of data movement, like numeric data transfer, and then alphabetic data transfer, alphanumeric data transfer. So while transferring the value between the sending field and receiving field, suppose if there is going to be mismatch in the size in between the sending field and receiving field, surely there will be some truncations or 0 fill or blank space fill will happen. So all these things seems to be important related to data movement verb. So with this, I'm closing this session. So thank you for listening. Thank you, students.